What's up, everyone? So today we're going to discuss Google. And Google never actually seems to run out of ways to erode individual sovereignty while presenting itself as a protector. Their latest assault on personal privacy was a so-called privacy preserving age verification system that they ended up announcing back on May 1st. My point here is that this whole system had really nothing but technical buzzwords wrapping itself in another layer of corporate authoritarianism, I guess you'd call it. It's them doing their best to collect data on you without actually telling you that's what they're doing. And they're rolling out digital IDs in Arkansas, Montana, Puerto Rico, West Virginia, with users in Arizona, Georgia, Maryland, and New Mexico able to actually use mobile IDs at the DMV. The system supposedly uses zero-knowledge proof technology to verify your age without actually revealing your personal details. But this is where the actual deception starts. Google consistently deploys technical terminology to disguise control mechanisms as protective features. And this isn't new. For example, Google's web and app activity sounds really helpful, but actually establishes a full-time surveillance system across all your devices, which is no different from state surveillance systems. Facebook's off-Facebook activity is marked as transparency, but extends their control grid across sites that they don't even own. And Apple's differential privacy is probably one of the best ones, but it was praised for anonymity, but actual logical analysis revealed that it still allowed the identification of users to some degree. Now, this language was deliberately engineered language that specifically existed to try and normalize the data extraction that you didn't know that you actually agreed to. As a result, it limits your ability to actually escape the ecosystem, which is done by design. The brilliant team at GrapheneOS absolutely exposed what Google conveniently omitted from their statements, which was that this privacy-preserving system locks users into highly privileged Google service integration and blocks any non-Google certified OS that you might want to use. The trap becomes obvious once you look just a little bit closer at it. Like using this age verification feature requires saving your full ID in the Google Wallet, and your entire identification documents get stored in their ecosystem as a result. Now, this fundamentally contradicts the purpose of zero-knowledge proofs, which exist specifically to prove facts like being over 18 without actually exposing underlying data. It reminds me of like that company that built the world's largest real ID database on an international level and conned hundreds of millions into giving up private info, photos, familial relationships, their likes and dislikes, as well as the info about things like their children. You may have heard of it. It's called Facebook. Now, to give this a comparison to how insane and backwards this actually is, let's imagine for a minute that your bank calls you and says, we've created a super secure system to prove you have money without actually revealing your balance. But first, deposit your entire financial history, social security numbers, and house keys with us in order to see it. Like you would stare at the bank teller who told you that as if they had 5 heads, and you would be right to do so. Google's system demands integration with its Play Integrity API, which is by default a gatekeeping tool that locks out any operating system that's outside of Google's control. Now, privacy-focused OSs are deliberately excluded because they block the data collection pipeline that Google Play services actually uses as a surveillance hub with system-level privileges, logging app usage, location data, device identifiers, nearby networks, and movement patterns, consistently sending this information back to Google. It's essentially like live streaming 24/7. And in 2020, the Associated Press actually revealed that Google's harvested location data, even when location history was disabled, still was enabled and exploiting apps like Maps and Search. Android devices have been shown to ping Google servers hundreds of times daily. even when idle or lacking things like a SIM card. Disabling tracking is intentionally difficult, often buried under things like misleading settings or split across multiple menus. And this pattern of privacy violations extends way beyond 2020, with Google facing lawsuits for tracking users in incognito mode in 2020, which was settled in 2024 by deleting billions of records, and accusations in Australia in 2020 for misleading users about data collection practices. But this is because the entire purpose is for corporate compliance, not user control. Like, this mirrors Microsoft's tactics using Windows to destroy browser competition in the 90s. But Google's approach is even more evil, I would argue, because they're marketing their control mechanism as an actual privacy feature. Now, remember when the European Union ended up fining Google some like $4.34 billion in 2018 for non-competitive behavior with Android. This is the same type of strategy, just with a fresh coat of paint. And as if it's not bad enough, businesses must also use Google's partner program to use this verification system as well. And that means that they provide the middleware and catch both the companies and the users in the same net. And there's no technical reason for this requirement beyond expanding Google's control. So Google controls both users and forces businesses into their ecosystem at the same time. Now, Bumble has already submitted to these terms by bending the knee. Now, zero knowledge proofs, or ZKPs, are fairly groundbreaking cryptographic techniques that allow someone to prove a statement is actually true without revealing any sensitive details about the underlying information. It was developed by MIT researchers in the 1980s. ZKPs work by enabling a prover to convince a verifier of a given fact, such as knowing a password or owning a certain amount of crypto, without actually disclosing the password itself or other private data that's associated with it. When implemented correctly, ZKPs can create secure and private systems like some cryptocurrencies that protect user transactions from prying eyes. Now, all that said, their effectiveness really depends on proper implementation, just like anything else in this world. And that's kind of the whole point of this video. So Graphene scored an absolute headshot on X from what I saw when they said using fancy cryptography doesn't make something private. This is probably the best way anyone could have really given Google the finger publicly and in a simple sentence. Implementation is absolutely everything. And when your system forces you to store your full ID in Google's wallet and then connect with Google services that have extensive data access, the zero knowledge proof becomes the functional equivalent of like spray painting a car that's exploded and calling it new. And Google's massive data logging practices absolutely make this worse in combination with its history. Google Cloud, for example, runs multiple tracking systems, including data access logs that do things like monitor user activity. The zero knowledge proofs might protect one specific data point, which is great. But when the surrounding infrastructure harvests data ruthlessly about usage patterns and device information and everything else that you do, it really doesn't matter. And privacy advocate Nomi Brockwell, who is an absolute badass, in my opinion, in the privacy advocacy field, if you want to call it that, also showed support for GrapheneOS's analysis when she pointed out how surveillance expands through tech companies concealing their actual data practices. And this is kind of how a proxy server works in general. Privacy-focused services like Startpage and Proton Mail have also taken pot shots, emphasizing the same kind of issues that Naomi brought up. And that assertion is that privacy is not a luxury, but it's actually a right. Why does Google actually force phone vendors to bundle Google apps and promote Google services and avoid competing with Google just to provide things like age verification? There's zero technical justification for acquiring Google certified devices with privileged Google service access to implement zero knowledge proof age verification. Instead, they leverage privacy concerns to expand their monopolistic control, and age verification will become increasingly important for things like online access and tying users into their actual ecosystem. Google strengthens their grips on the throats of everyone by doing this. Their playbook is fairly transparent in that they identify a genuine problem, like age verification, for example, market a solution as privacy-friendly, but implement it to expand control over users and businesses all in one shot. And they hand it out like a blanket with smallpox, acting like they're like some benevolent ones for giving it to you in the first place. And this absolutely kind of raises questions about your actual sovereignty. Like, at what point do we reject convenience based on coercion in favor of genuine things like self-determination? Like, I totally get this is a really big question to ask, but I mean, how do you see it? What's your breaking point? Let me know in the comments. GrapheneOS absolutely deserves recognition, not just for doing things like exposing Google's manipulation, but for also creating a genuine counter-economic alternative outside of the corporate control grid that exists. The fact that they use the Pixel to do this, a Google phone, is almost comical. Their operating system absolutely represents some of the best practices of agorism, delivering things like functionality without actually surrendering to surveillance capitalism. And the conveniences that you supposedly sacrifice are actually the very chains of digital dependence, but they've been painted gold and sold to us as these gold chains instead of actual shackles, which is what they really are. And what you gain isn't privacy, it's liberation from a inherently authoritarian technological structure that by design is made to monitor, influence, and ultimately control your very behavior. And even if you're not fully ready to completely exit their system, you absolutely can begin to establish things like personal sovereignty by systematically reducing dependence on centralized control mechanisms. And in no way are the first steps hard. Like, anyone can do this. To start, I would say replace Gmail with an alternative that you're cool with after reviewing your own threat model. Some examples would be Proton Mail or Tuda, which claim to respect your right to communicate and privacy without surveillance. Like, do they? I don't know. I doubt it, but they're both for-profit companies. So when push comes to shove, if you're really paranoid about this, then you're always free to set up your own email server. It's a pain in the ass beyond belief, but that's what you have to do, then that's what you have to do. If you want to go from trusting or hoping to actually knowing, my suggestion to people is to not even use email if you can avoid it. Like, you really kind of don't need it nowadays, aside from like throwaways for making actual accounts. There's so many good private messengers that it's kind of nuts. Aside from that, you reject Chrome's monitoring apparatus in favor of things like Brave. Chrome functions as a corporate surveillance tool, sending your browsing patterns, search integrations, and even idle activity directly back to its masters. After the latest debacle with Firefox, I would be leery of them as well, to be honest with you. Brave blocks involuntary tracking by default. And of course, other notable mentions are LibriWolf, Mullvad browser, Ladybird, and I'm not really a fan of DuckDuckGo because they allow for Microsoft scripts to run, but dishonorable mentions that you should absolutely stay away from are going to be like Microsoft Edge, Chrome, and virtually all of the browsers that don't have some type of hardening or privacy focus to them whatsoever. You should liberate yourself from Google's location tracking by adopting organic maps or Magic Earth, or which are more like community-maintained OpenStreetMap data without building movement profiles on you. Now, severing these connections matters because Google's core business isn't services, it's behavior control through data extraction, which we're basically giving them. They monitor what you look for, where you move, what you purchase, who you associate with, and how you spend your time, the very definition of authoritarian surveillance. So each application exists to capture different aspects of your existence for their profile. The darknet and overlay networks demonstrate that alternative infrastructure is absolutely possible, which is one of the reasons why I personally love them. And you can implement things like counter-economic resistance through really simple substitutions. So NewPipe, for example, instead of YouTube surveillance app, and Sears XNG or Kagi or Brave Search instead of Google's query logging system, decentralized solutions like SyncThing or self-hosted Nextcloud or OnlyOffice instead of Google's centralized storage. Every replacement breaks a sensor in their surveillance apparatus, and you, in turn, gain control bit by bit when you do things like that, and you force the ecosystem to acknowledge that privacy still has some value to it. Businesses and developers should stop integrating with Google's partner programs just because they offer convenient solutions like this age verification nonsense. We should all demand open standards that don't actually chain us to the ecosystem. And individual action matters more than appealing to authorities on any level. Support organizations that are actively building tools for digital sovereignty, develop community-based alternatives that bypass corporate and government control, and publicly expose the logical contradictions in deceptive marketing like this privacy-preserving age verification system that fundamentally compromises individual autonomy. The solution is not more regulation from the same power structures that enabled surveillance capitalism to begin with. It's creating and supporting parallel systems that render these control mechanisms completely irrelevant. And we can do it with nothing more than our minds. We have an incredible amount of power. Respect to all the others who immediately expose what's happening when things like this happen. This video is totally a on the shoulder of giants kind of thing. If this kind of logical analysis has revealed the contradictions in Google's privacy claims, share this knowledge with others that are actually still caught in these systems and have no clue they're in this web. The first step towards digital liberation isn't petitioning authorities for better treatment or more regulation, like inmates begging for more rec time, but rather it's recognizing the fundamental design of these systems as mechanisms of control disguised as convenience and protection, and calling them out for what they are and making moves to make sure that you're independent from them. In any case, thank you for watching to the end. I'll see you in the next video.